So I'll jump right into how distillation works. I think it's very, like, the easiest way to look at it is just you have alcohol that you boil, and then it goes through like an evaporation, and then something colder, and then it condenses, right? So the biggest difference is that alcohol have a boiling point of like 78 degrees, and water is at 100. So what's going to happen is that alcohol boils first, and then the water gets left behind, and that's how you get like spirits. So all the beers you're drinking, if we threw that into a stew and then distill it, then you get like a vodka. So there are two kinds of very traditional distillation, and one is pot still, and the other one is column distillation. And so with pot still, the reason why they actually use copper is to kind of do like a stripping run. So it just like pulls out any sulfite, which gives like spirit a bad taste. And then for column, it's just something, it's like a pot still, but imagine the pot still is like stacked a bunch of times. So same principle as like what distillation is. There's like heating, and then all the alcohol starts evaporating. The top bit over there is like a reflux. So what happens, it kind of like cleans it up again. Then whatever vapor that does go through, that becomes your alcohol. But so with the continuous still, when you choose with your spirit, like what distillation you want to use, with continuous, it does like a really good job at cleaning it. So then when you think of white spirits like vodka, gin, those would be better fit for continuous still. And then for pot still, you're looking at like your whiskeys and your rums. And then I think vacuum distillation is extremely new, and I think Empirical is probably the first to do it in a big scale. So vacuum distillation has the same principle of heating, evaporating, condensing, and getting alcohol, except that you put your whole system under vacuum. And that reduces the boiling temperature. So if like atmospheric temperature here is 1000 mbars, if you put it under vacuum and you bring it to like 20 mbars, water at room temp, like normal earth pressure, boils at 100 degrees. When you bring it all the way down and you're in like a vacuum of 20 bar, the evaporating point now becomes like 26 degrees. So with vacuum distillation, it's mostly used in like making perfume, because a lot of the compounds they work with have a very high boiling point, and like if they use traditional distillation, they would not even get the aromas they want. And it's also used for any freshness. So when you think of like perfume and you have a lot of soft ingredients, whether it's like lavender, roses, all of those are very volatile and gentle. So then heat would actually decompose the ingredient and you don't get that smell. And that's where vacuum distillation comes in. So what it essentially does is just brings down the boiling point until it's extremely low. And then it goes through the exact same principle of like heating, evaporating, and condensing. So this is like a very small scale of what a rotary evaporator would look like. So essentially here is like a heating bath. Under vacuum, so for spirits, it has to heat up to 79. But because you put it under vacuum, it can go as low as like 16 degrees. And then this is like a rotating flask. So imagine I want to make like a strawberry gin. So I throw strawberries and gin in here, and then it's like, and I keep the bath at 16, right? Then the guy on the top, he's a vacuum machine. And so what that does, it just puts the whole system in a vacuum and kind of does like a pooling. Then because it pools, it goes up here, it starts evaporating at like 16 degrees. And then you need a colder temperature for it to like condense. So what runs through in that tube is like glycol. So glycol is like a freezing agent, and it's as cold as like -30. because if you're distilling at 16, then for it to be able to condense, it needs to be below 16. Then once it does condensation, then you get your spirit. So I think the biggest reason why you would use, or why we use vacuum distillation is for freshness of flavor. And I think my favorite example is, if I ask you what's the best orange you've had, for me it's like an actual orange, where you get like all this like aroma, like citrusy aroma from the peel, bitterness from the pith, and then like sweet, sour, juicy from the pulp. But a marmalade is the exact same thing, but you just lose all this freshness, and to us, not a true representation of an orange. So imagine a marmalade and a fresh orange is the difference between traditional distillation and vacuum distillation. So this is the distillery, and these are the stills that we use.
Is that all the entire setup? There's nothing in the back?
There is another, whoa, back? Yeah. So this is like maybe a third of our distillery in Copenhagen. And this is where all the distilling happen. We are grain to bottle, so we do like brewing as well. So we make like a beer sake hybrid before we distill. And yeah, so that rotary evaporator that you saw in the earlier picture, this is like a monster version of it. So same thing, all the alcohol, whatever you're trying to distill goes in here, and then it gets heated, evaporates, condenses down. Oh yeah, I did that, I forgot it. So to break it down, what you have is like a double jacketed reactor. So that's where, if I'm making a strawberry gin, I'll put the strawberry gin in there. And it's like a metal still that has like 2 parts. And so outside is a separate column where you can run hot water through it to make it warm. And that's where you get the temperature from. Then it goes, so it'll start evaporating and it goes up here. So this is like a reflux glass. So same thing when you saw the pot still, where it has like a little top piece that just takes back anything that's not pure. Then it goes down to the condenser, and this is where you run like glycol, where it's like -30 liquid, so it starts condensing. Then this is like a bigger version of a vacuum pump. So what this does is just removes all the pressure. So if I did not have this, then everything in the tank is at 1,000 mbars, which doesn't work.
Just as a size reference, how many liters is your evacuation?
1,000?
So those are 200. So
Yeah. Size reference, I've been in there, and I think I can put 3 more of me.
I'm sorry, but for an industrial level, sort of like vacuum distillator, and a batch size of 1,000 liters,
Yeah.
and how fast is the pace of like reducing the pressure to the vacuum, like let's say 0.01, something like that,
Yeah.
that is needed to produce consistent distilled alcohol beverage?
So actually, to put the system under vacuum, it takes like seconds. Yeah, it's really fast. As long as like you keep everything locked, it takes like really seconds to bring from 1,000 all the way to like 20. But the whole distillation process would then take quite a while. I would say for our 1,000 liter run, it would take 36 hours to go through the whole 1,000 liters. Yeah. Oh, so this setup is like not available anywhere else. So we kind of made it ourselves. Like this would normally be what you find in making beer. And then I guess these are like if you brew like moonshine. And then this is just, I don't know, mechanic stuff. But so we kind of just took the logic and like the understanding behind like how distillation works and kind of put everything together. Okay. So when you have spirits, I don't know if you like, there are like people dying from like drinking moonshine or like, that happens a lot. Yeah. But so, so what goes through when you make spirits, so when you distill, the first stuff that comes out before you heat your boiling temperature is like 4 shots, and that's basically just like methanol. If you drink like 30 mLs of that, I think you go blind first, and then maybe you drink 30 more and you die. And then the next one that comes out, which is when your stew reaches the temperature, which is 79, then 4 shots start coming out. So 4 shots have a lot of flavors compacted into it, but it also has like small traces of methanol. So depending on what kind of spirit you're trying to produce, then you might or might not use it. So I would say like tequilas and mezcals, they use a lot of 4 shots, which is why when you drink tequilas or mezcals, like you most likely have a headache the next day, or like when you drink it, it has like a sharpness to it. That comes from using 4 shots in the spirit. Then the bulk of what everyone uses is the hearts. You use essentially almost every part of it. And then towards the end, you get tails, which is just like water, because tails would come in from 96 degrees. So that's how you make like if you do traditional distillation, that's the cuts you make. We're a bit extra, and we do 100 cuts for each of our run. And so what that does is just, so actually my first week at Empirical, I moved in 2019 to Copenhagen, and I was with them as part of like research. But for me to begin research, I had to go through like every department, from like brewing to like making koji to like distilling, and then like blending. So one of the days I had to do blending. So we have all these cards here, and we do like small 10 ml samples where we try everything and then kind of decide which is the best cuts to make whatever ingredients we're working with. And it was like 8 a.m. And so I was like, okay, I have to try all these 100 cuts, and I drank everything, and I got really drunk. It wasn't 9 a.m. yet. And I was like looking at all the distillers, and I'm like, how do you guys do this? I'm like really, really smashed. And they're like, you spit everything out. But yeah, so the reason why we do cuts is because I think we looked at everything almost very micro. Like with strawberries, for instance, it's not just a strawberry, right? For the flavor of strawberries, there's actually 350 flavor compounds. So in our heads, like how can you express 350 flavor molecules in just doing like 4 cuts? And with that, we now do 100 cuts. So if the alcohol goes in at like 40% alcohol, and we do cut 1 to cut 100, cut 1 would be as high as like 90, and then cut 100 is as low as like 2%. So if I took all the 100 and like threw it back in together, it would be like 40. But with each cut, it's a different ABV, which means it pulls a different flavor compound. And this kind of allows us to have like consistency, and also allows us to be very precise. Like with us, we use a lot of very fresh ingredients, and like no 2 apples are the same, no 2 limes are the same. And so to ensure that consistency, that 100 cuts allows us to do that. I think 2 years ago, we had a spirit called Fuck Trump, and it's our habanero spirit. So, but habanero has like seasons, right? So there's a season where it's really, really good, and when we make 100 cuts, 80 of them are like amazing. But then it was our most popular spirit where we had to do it off season as well. And being able to do the cuts allows us to make sure, even though it's not in its peak, we can still be proud of the bottle we put out. And so off season, you'll be like 40 cuts that are like great. But doing these cuts allows us to kind of do like Photoshop and like reconstruct what to us is the best representation of the ingredient that we work with. Yeah. So free from means free from categorization. Oh no, there's a slide missing.
Yeah, so you need, it's generally by site, so you need to go back. Okay, which part do you need?
That one. No, with this one. This one. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay. All right. So these are the type of spirits. I'm sure I'm like missing some stuff, but I tried to be as thorough as possible. So essentially, how I've broken down like the type of spirits is how the grain build is, or like how you end up making the spirit. So there's like 4 main branch. So spirits made from grains or starches, and then you have spirits made from fruits, spirits made from cane or molasses, and then spirits made from agave, right? So anything for, so then to like break it down further, for grain and starch, you have vodka, whiskeys, soju, aquavit, soju, baijiu, and gin that all falls into spirits made using grains and starch. And then for fruit, you have brandy, arak, fanny, and absinthe. And then for cane or molasses, you have rums. Then for agaves, you have tequilas and mezcals. And then from there, it can be broken down into more. I'm not gonna go through it, it's very dry. But so for instance, like for brandy, like if you wanna call a brandy a cognac, it needs to be produced within that 79,000 acres of the AOC region to be called a cognac. And then every one of these spirits have a category, or like and for you to be part of that, there is a criteria for you to do it. So it's almost the same as like natural wines, not natural wine, like traditional or old world wines, where if you want to call it organic wine, biodynamic, and so on, there needs to be like boxes that you need to tick for you to be able to call that. So one example would be like whiskey. So for you to call something whiskey, it needs to be from a mash that is less than 95% alcohol, and then bottled not below 40. And then for it to be called bourbon, it needs to be in US and have a mash bill that is 51% corn. And then I think then Tennessee whiskey, same, it needs to have the same production requirement as bourbon, but needs to be manufactured in Tennessee and then go through maple charcoal. And Scotch must be aged in oak barrels for 3 years before it's bottled. So for you,
is that by law or?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So it's like regulation for you to say, I want my spirit is this. It needs to like tick all these boxes. So even for like gins, like you cannot just call a product a gin. It needs X amount of juniper, and then if it's like above the amount, then it cannot be called a gin. It's called a Geneva. And I think for Empirical, where we are very flavor first, that box that we're trying to fit in doesn't work for us. Like what our whole mission is to just like share flavors, and then when you have all these boxes, the way you can express those flavor is very constrained, and that's why we've now kind of championed like free form, where we don't have to fit all these boxes. I think we stumbled on this quite accidentally. Our first 3 spirit that we did, we were like, oh, we should call it something like, you know, it's easier to sell a gin than like this spirit that has no category. And so we had a smoked juniper spirit that was to us very much like whiskey, like profile wise. And so we're like, oh, this would be like a whiskey, but like, then they're like, no, you cannot call it that because there's no like mash bill. You have to, but it has enough juniper, you can call it a gin. But we're like, this is not the profile of a gin, but it doesn't, so that doesn't work for us. So we're like, oh, speaking of gin, we have another blend called Easy Tiger, which was a Douglas fir spirit. And like, if you smell like pine, it's very aligned with like gin, right? Where you have, it's very botanical forward. But then because there was no juniper in it, we couldn't call it that as well. So then we're like, fuck it, we don't need to be in any of the category. And then we just do everything flavor first. So I guess I did all of that work to say there's no point in
Laws be there.
yeah. There. But yeah, so we step out of like categories to create free form spirits, and what that allows us to do is just share flavor in like an unconstrained sense. And so freeform also allows us to be flavor first. So these are like the products we have at the moment. So the first one, the plum, I suppose, is a plum kernel spirit. And so you get like a bitter almond marzipan flavor from there, and then it's rectified with a marigold kombucha and sits at 32% ABV. And also, all our spirits does not have a fixed alcohol percentage. I think everyone just kind of fall in the, it needs to be 40, but no one, like, why does it need to be 40? So
there's no law of like alcohol percentage. Right?
well, when you try to be in the category, yes. But when you say free form, then no. But so now, like, to us, if we're like flavor first, then the ABV shouldn't be 40. It should be when the the ingredient that we're working with is best expressed. So for the plum, I suppose we get, to us, the perfect flavor at 32% ABV, then that's what it is. Then we have Ayuk, which is a Pasilla Mihe spirit. So Pasilla Mihe is a chili that's grown in Oaxaca in Mexico. So what's very unique about a chili is semi-dried on the plant and then dried over hardwood. So that hardwood drying actually gives a very distinct smoke to it, but it's more like a food smoke. And then after the distillation, we rest it in a sherry cask. So this, to me, is like if like mezcal and like rye whiskey have a love child. And then we have Symphony 6, which is has three distillation of citrus leaf, fig leaves, and coffee leaf, and then it's blended with vetiver, ambrette, and blackcurrant bud. So when we did Symphony 6, it was like a perfume approach to it, thinking of like top notes, base notes, and then making the spirit from there. And then the last one is Soka, which is a sorghum cane spirit. So sorghum grain is consumed the most in China, I guess, to make baijiu, and then in US, just as like eating. But the cane is a wastage crop, so essentially after each harvest, they would just chop it down and burn. And we've now opened a contract distillery in Milwaukee where after each harvest, we juice the cane down, and then it's fermented with a Tai Chong yeast and then vacuum distilled. But because of the vacuum distillation, you get, it's like so cold that you get this very like green apple hay profile. But so nothing like gin or vodka or whiskey. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Let's go back to your previous slide at least, so that we have some things there.
Back?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the floor is open for questions, please. Yeah.
Well, this is truly fascinating. Thank you so much for the like enlightening speech. Okay, my question one is like, how do you quantify? Okay, how do you quantify like from each of the 100 cuts of Yorkers, like which of the like the flavor compound? How do you quantify it? If so, how? Like, do you count? Yeah.
So it's like really up to our head distiller of like tasting, because it's always going to come out very different.
Yes, but like if you say like there are flavor molecules, I assume like the molecule mass is so low you cannot use LC, so it has to be GC. So like what I'm guessing is like you were doing something like for each of the 100 cuts, like you're taking a sample, send it to the GC, and you see what's inside, and then you can get a graph of the like which of the flavor molecules.
Oh no, that's like, yeah, but that's like a lot of money. Lab testing is really expensive.
Yeah, that's LC-mass thing.
Well, who
essentially.
does that? Actually?
So
if I got the money or my employer will, I will.
Okay.
so we're pretty broke and we just go by taste. Yeah. Yeah, so I think like with our main spirit, so we're grain to bottle, we do everything from scratch. So like I said, we brew like a beer sake hybrid, and then that gets distilled twice, and that becomes your low wine. So then our low wine goes for lab testing to make sure it's safe for consumption.
I see.
But then when we do the cuts, there is no lab testing for all the 100. It's just taste testing. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see. Also, like you mentioned about like making alcohol content from biomass,
Right,
and they
right.
got an apple flavor. Like, what do you think? Why do you think that's happening?
For Soka?
Yeah, from like you mentioned something about Milwaukee, like you're using their biomass and then you're fermenting it, and then after your like vacuum distillation, it developed an apple flavor.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah,
do you
it
think
has like a green apple flavor, but I think like the dominant profile of that spirit is very aligned with like an agricole rum, and that comes from using cane. And like it's the sorghum stock is a cane. Then that green notes would come from just like vacuum distillation.
I see. Thank you.
Questions? Adam?
You mentioned the 4 shots. You said you take 100 cuts. So how many of the 100 cuts are equivalent to like 4 shots of methanol?
So with our methanol content is extremely low. So I think when you do traditional distillation, the way that it's done, like the fermentation process is very different than ours, and that creates a lot more methanol. But I think cut 1 that's it, that has methanol. And we've done lab tests on that. Even our cut 1 has like, it's like so trace that if I drank cut 1, I'm not gonna go blind. Yeah.
I have so many questions about the concept of methanol content.
But yeah, so we do like a double distillation for our wash, right? So after our brewing, we get this like 9-10% beer sake. Then we do a distillation run, and in that distillation run, the glass column in the earlier picture, we fill that with like prismatic packing, which is essentially just like copper springs. And what the copper spring does, it does like a cleaning. So then it makes our spirit very safe. Then from there, we macerate with whatever ingredients. So for instance, the plum, once we get that spirit, we macerate it with the kernels, then it goes through a distillation. So the 4-shot wouldn't have much methanol because it's already been double distilled. Yeah.
So you have time for one more question. Quick one.
You have a personal favorite?
Yes, Soka.
That was quick.
We have time for elaboration.
Oh, sorry. So during COVID, we couldn't go anywhere except be around Denmark, and we wanted to create a non-grain spirit, and that was kind of how Soka started. We just wanted a non-grain spirit, and we wanted the sugar sauce to be something that's not overly commercialized. So during COVID, we traveled around R&D, so me and like 3 others, we traveled around Denmark to all the farms looking for this alternative sugar, and then ended up in Bornholm, which is like a little town, island, yeah, and met a sorghum farmer. And I think just because of how, like this is the only product that I've seen and been part of since the beginning that it's my favorite. Yeah.
Well, I think that's comes to our time. So thank you for giving us